Hello and welcome back to another episode of Nick Tiffany's Movie Reviews, coming at you online and in print format at nicktiffany.com, in audio format wherever you get your podcasts, and even in video on YouTube. We're trying out this whole live stream thing as well, so sometimes you can tune in and you can listen to the episode as it's happening, like right now, or you can always listen afterwards on YouTube, Spotify, etc. This week, leading up to the Olympics, which are kicking off tomorrow, there's kind of a 2 week spell where not a lot's coming out, not at least in the theaters. Deadpool and Wolverine is certainly the biggest attraction, the biggest draw, which is already tracking to make 300 some plus $1 million worldwide, which does not surprise me because it's the marriage of all things that people have kind of wanted in a movie for a little while, especially when it comes to some of the more violent Marvel characters, giving them the R rating, given a chance to poke fun at Disney post 20th Century Fox acquisition. But before we get into Deadpool, there was one other film that I went and saw in the theater. Was so glad that I did, but was also just like freaked out of my mind, because it always happens that anytime I go see a horror movie without a friend or without other critics or something, I'm always the one person there. One or two, and the other person's, sitting far away, hopefully far enough away where they can't see me, just like covering my ears and covering my eyes as I try not to jump in terror. A film that I missed at the 2024 Seattle International Film Festival was Oddity. It's kind of rare, I feel like, that you get a lot of horror movies at that festival, just that one in particular. South by Southwest has always been one that does a lot of midnighter programming, a lot of creepy, eerie, horror-centric type stuff. So I was bummed when I didn't, for all the things that I saw at SIFF, I did not get around to Oddity. And having just coming off of last week, watching Longlegs and, kind of touching on some of that narrative, it's the scariest movie of the decade. Oddity is frightening. It's like all these serial killer movies. And it really wasn't. It's a great movie. More akin to Sinister and kind of incorporating dread and just leaving a really uneasy feeling. Oddity, in my own opinion, far more of that scarier film, a lot scarier than Longlegs for sure. Two, just at least I would say, me being me, probably at least 4 or 5 pretty great jump scares in there. Two that were just masterful, and I mean, I let out a little shriek, a little like, oh my god. And it's always, for me, that's always a good sign when a movie gets you like that, though. It just brings that heart rate back up. Oddity, I just kind of want to preface, I didn't know too much going in. All I know is I've seen this picture of the poster where there's kind of a psychic medium, and then on the flip side of the image is this wooden man who's really kind of freaky looking. You don't really know what's going on there. And I didn't know too much going into the movie other than this medium's trying to figure out what's happened to somebody. And the way this film starts was just so freaking great. Just as far as something that not only grips you immediately, throws you into an uncomfortable situation of what the hell do I do? This idea of, this woman's isolated out at this, family farm somewhere in the country. Her husband's not going to be around until the morning. And all she has to do is stay the night out there. And that's it. They don't really have a peephole. They've got kind of one of those cool metal sliding, not medieval. I think of The Matrix, though, or any movie where, you need the password and you slide the little shutter open. And so this woman, she gets the feeling that she's being watched, and she keeps hearing all these sounds outside. And when she checks, wouldn't you know it, somebody's outside. And this person is trying to convince her, hey, I saw you walking around outside earlier. Someone went into your house while you were out there. Let me in. And I knew nothing going into this movie, and I really don't want to talk too much more about the plot as far as anything goes, because that intro alone, just immediately this wave of just ickiness swept over me of like, oh my god, this is, it's a tough situation to imagine. You're damned if you do, damned if you don't, almost. And just the situation it places the main character in to begin with was just frightening. and for a film that kind of deals with different medical patients, with talking to the dead, with kind of reaching out. There's these pair of sisters, one who's more of a psychic medium, one who is not so much so. And, the film has this sort of larger mystery going on behind the scenes that slowly unravels itself. But it does so in a very entertaining, often really creepy and unsettling way, trying to discover who is really pulling the strings in this kind of horrible orchestration, but also looking at some of the downside of what can happen when it comes to medical patients, this idea of living too close to some of these places, kind of deals with this idea of what's real and what's not, what are you to believe and what are you not to believe. And as is the case in a lot of great horror movies too, is someone gonna believe me when I tell them what I've seen, or does this kind of make a case against me, or does this make it easier for someone to potentially commit me, or for someone to call into question my sanity? And at 90 minutes or so, it's breezy. I don't want to say it's quick because it really lingers in a lot of great ways, and it plays around with a lot of classic horror tropes, from using dark spaces incredibly well. Of course, they're out at some barn that doesn't have any light, which it's just classic horror. You're ticking some of the boxes off, but it's when I say that with a grin, because it's just like it makes me more unsettled, which is obviously what they want to do. And so it's like, okay, yep, creaky wood everywhere, check. Dark spaces, lots of them, check. Weird noises and scratching outside, you're just like, all right, they set the scene really well. They play around with this idea of spirituality, talking to the dead, all sorts of different things. I won't say more than that, but Oddity, I would say if you were looking for pure horror, this is, at least for what I've seen this year, the best that 2024 has had to offer. I know there's films like Cuckoo coming out soon, which I'm very much looking forward to, but I don't know. Oddity is just the best of everything as far as what you're looking for, I think, from a horror experience. Anybody who asked me, hey, I'm looking something scary, something different, kind of maybe screwed up a little bit, it's like, okay, this was totally different for me in a lot of ways. So if you have a chance, Oddity's kind of playing in limited release right now. If you could see it in the theaters, absolutely do so. If not, I could totally understand. But we'll move along to what most people, I would say, want to hear about, and that's Deadpool and Wolverine. Deadpool and Wolverine has been in the making for some time now. Hugh Jackman has played this role more times than you could probably count. And in so many ways, this is a kind of goodbye love letter to the Fox Marvel ensemble that was in the early 2000s, the X-Men particularly. And before you had the Avengers, before you had these billion-dollar properties just printing money, they're standing on the shoulders of giants, and those giants are the X-Men. Those are some of those unsung Fox films that really paved the way for people to try new things and take risks with comic book characters and give a seriousness to them, but also give them a little levity, give them some humor. Obviously, the humor, I think in some ways we've gone too far with. Deadpool is the wrong film to use that example for. But, thinking about all the greatest superhero movies, the MCU's got some. They've got a few. I wouldn't go as far to say they've got more than 5 or 6 maybe, but who knows. But you think about all the other properties. You think about Spider-Man. You think about Ghost Rider. You think about just random awesome little films doing their own thing, not needing to be in a connected universe, but all telling singular stories, concerned with just what's going on there. And the X-Men, I mean, that's Days of Future Past, for me, is probably the best X-Men overall film out there, I would say. Wolverine being such a integral part of that, kind of bridging these different gaps. So we've seen Wolverine bridge gaps before. So bringing him into contact with Deadpool, combining these two guys who cannot die, much as they would love to kill one another, much as Wolverine would probably love to die as the horrible things happen around him on multiple timelines. They're shit out of luck, unfortunately. And of course, in Deadpool and Wolverine, they're going to end up stuck together. This movie is going to print money. This is one of those films where, as a film critic, sometimes it almost doesn't matter what I feel like I've got to say critically about the film. Could they have done some things better? Sure. Could the story have been tighter? Sure. Does it suck that they kind of have to do a little bit of the, all right, wink and nod, we're doing the TVA stuff. So, we acknowledge Loki, we acknowledge all these different timelines, we're talking about the multiverse. And so that's kind of baked in for better or for worse. If you're going to have Deadpool interacting with the MCU, you've got to play by some of Disney's rules. And surprisingly, Disney was pretty cool with a lot of stuff. There were more moments than I can count where I was incredibly surprised, whether it was the language, who was delivering some of the profanity, some of the legacy characters or people that may or may not pop up. I know there's tons of spoilers for the cameos out there. I'm not going to say anything. I would hope that you can see it on your own. Stay off Twitter. As always, it's just a landmine. Got my best friends arguing. I'm like, oh, I just saw the movie. And it's like, oh, so-and-so's in it, right? I'm like, how do you know that? You shouldn't know that. It was such a great surprise in theaters. So really, truly, try to go into this movie, if you can, without reading too much about it. But Deadpool, the first two movies I enjoyed. Ryan Reynolds is someone I've had not a long-standing beef with, but my biggest gripe about him as an actor is the fact that it's just kind of the same shtick over and over, different movie to different movie. And that's fine sometimes. I know people love him. I know he's clearly talented. But, when you're doing Mint Mobile ads and you're doing all your different stuff, you're doing Wrexham, which is a little more earnest, perhaps, a little more of himself than the character he often portrays. So I don't know, going into Deadpool again, this is the side of, if you don't like Ryan Reynolds or his humor, the comedy style, if you didn't like the other Deadpool movies, you're probably not going to like this one. What you probably would like about this is the insane level of carnage, action, and really Hugh Jackman. I mean, he's the guy. Mr. Does It All from Broadway to just incredibly just in shape. The shape that this man got into for this film again. It's absurd. It's like the Christian Bale stuff. The fluctuation, the ability to just rebulk and oh my God, he's just huge. He's massive, which of course Ryan Reynolds pokes fun at or plays along with in typical sexual fashion. But Hugh Jackman, especially after Logan, Days of Future Past, even the first three X-Men movies, even X-Men Origins Wolverine, this is a traumatic character who's just seen so much death in his life. There is this, I don't want to call it the spoiler necessarily, but when you look at these events, I forget what they're calling them now in Marvel. It's too many shows, there's too many things interconnected, but this idea that there are certain events that have to happen, there's certain key characters in each timeline or in the universe at different places, who have a role that feels like they can't escape it. And Wolverine has always been that kind of troubled character, someone who watches all the people around him die, wishing that he could perish alongside them, but almost cursed to kind of walk the earth forever. And Hugh Jackman brings the incredible intensity that he always brings to the character of Wolverine, for sure. But some of that, as tender as it can be, tenderness that you kind of saw in Logan when he was working with Daphne Keane, that he would get when he talked with Jean, even Mystique sometimes. So truly, Hugh Jackman is a huge relief for this film, if only to help share that comedic load to kind of balance out the motor mouth Ryan Reynolds, who I would say is pretty self acknowledging about how, hey, I got to do something a little different if I'm going to up my game to now be in the MCU. Deadpool's really got to bring it, and you got to do something that you haven't done before, or you've got to evolve as a character in some ways. And so I definitely appreciated how they were trying to potentially evolve Deadpool as a character, make it a little less funny. And I know that's not possible. I mean, it's a funny movie around it, but in the more serious moments, give him a chance perhaps to be a little more serious, to not just make everything a massive joke. Of course, there's just incredible fan service and payoff in ways that, I think back to The Flash just last year, watching what they tried to do with multiple timelines, characters that could be this just CGI-ification of everything, and everything looking so horrible in that sphere and just feeling a little more insulting. You've got the CGI Christopher Reeve. There were just, there is a way that you can honor the things that have come before these certain characters without just kind of botching it. I feel like they did in The Flash. And so in a way, and then there's No Way Home, Spider-Man, which was like, all right, it made a ton of money. People loved seeing the three Spider-Men together. I loved it too. I won't lie, but it didn't feel like it was the best Spider-Man movie. It was just like, oh, this is pretty fun. It's all the Spider guys, and all the Spider guys bad guys, and it just, I love those movies. But the idea of just, hey, remember this guy? Now we got a movie. It's not just that simple. And so while there is definitely tongue in cheek, there's some cameos, there's some totally unexpected stuff in this film and people, none of it ever overstays its welcome, I would say. And none of it is ever done in a way that feels obnoxious or disingenuous to everything that kind of came before. Again, it's Deadpool, so there's just going to be a lot of humor. It's nonstop tongue in cheek. Nobody is safe. It's like South Park. Deadpool's got a round in the chamber for everybody, for Warner Brothers, for Disney, Fox, you name it. He's got a bone to pick with everybody. So in that regard, there's just so many moments. Especially, I watched it as someone, again, who always has kind of a little beef, a little tiff, if you will, with Warner Brothers. So I got many chuckles out of some of the lines kind of slung their way in this film. I'm not going to spoil them, but it's going to be hard to miss them. And just some awesome moments. I don't know. The theater was packed. We saw it in IMAX. It was in 3D. I don't know why it was in 3D. It didn't need to be in 3D. Doctor Strange being in 3D, I kind of understood maybe a little bit more when Multiverse of Madness came out. But unless you're Avatar, I don't really know why I need the 3D. It's the only time in IMAX I could make, so it is what it is, and the glasses are good enough now that it almost feels like you're not wearing them. But you have those 3D moment where I'm coming at you in slow-mo, and you're like, okay, we still doing this thing in 2024? Are we not past that? Whatever. It's not a Deadpool gripe, it's just a 3D gripe, James Cameron, he can do it. If you're not James Cameron, though, I don't know why you need to do it or have to try to do it. I don't know who's hurting for, IMAX is, I don't know, more money. Who knows? But the audience had an incredible time. Laughter for 2 solid hours. Tons of little moments that definitely made you like, oh, okay. Like, no. And so I'm definitely more of a fanboy, perhaps. Sometimes than maybe I lead on, but I know than a lot of other critics for sure. And while DC is my bread and butter, a lot of the early Marvel properties were kind of the films that I probably started on as far as some of my comic book movie experiences went. And you know me, I'm always a fan of the more serious, kind of grounded stories. And I think Fox was telling a lot of those back in the day. And so, in a lot of ways, it's just it's a sad reminder, unfortunately, that Disney owns everything now, and that Disney wants their hands on everything. Weird thought. I loved so many things as far as the music credits in the movies go. They're like, oh, this was, done courtesy of this group. They were granted permission to use it courtesy of this group. And then Sony, it was like, oh, through negotiations with Sony, we were able to use this. I don't know anything about how music copyright stuff goes, so that could be nothing. But I just found it ironic that, you know, the company that owns Spider-Man or the rights to Spider-Man, like, yeah, we'll negotiate, then you can use some of this music in your movie. You know, you don't want to give Disney everything too easy. You don't want to roll over for them, because obviously Disney will just buy you and they'll do whatever they can to get their hands on properties. But as long as Spider-Man remains billions of dollars in value, good luck, Disney. But Deadpool and Wolverine, you're going to get exactly what you're paying for. Unlimited carnage, just blood, gore, battling in the style that, again, you know that these characters almost have to have. I keep seeing so many things where, again, you know, the internet loves to clown on Zack Snyder. They love, you know, Zack Snyder's version of something, and the meme is usually just someone who's like extra ripped, and there's extra violence and blood and whatnot. But, you know, it's like Zack Snyder's Wolverine would probably just look like Logan. It would probably look like the best rated R examples that we've gotten of a guy with adamantium claws killing people. You know, heads are going to roll, limbs and bodies are going to be dismembered. There's going to be total carnage. And that is a side of some of these characters that if you are actually a fan of them, you've probably been waiting for. Because in animation, it's like, all right, cool. You could do some pretty badass stuff, more so maybe than we might get in live action. Or, you know, it's PG-13 and you're like, oh, I know he probably took that guy's head off, but we're not going to get to see it. You're going to get to see it. And Hugh Jackman just does his thing so well. You know, I'm always reminded of that scene in X-Men Origins Wolverine, which time has not always been kind to, but still has some really great bits when he emerges out of the water, just full on yell, tubes popping off of him, and it's just primal. It's animalistic. That's the Hugh Jackman you're getting here. And it is worth every penny. And it's worth listening to Ryan Reynolds do his thing. And, you know, maybe I was just drinking the Hugh Jackman Kool-Aid, but Ryan Reynolds was a lot more bearable this time around. Deadpool as a character, and the writing was a lot funnier. The action, the cinematography has never looked better in a Deadpool movie. Deadpool movie, mind you. I had a great time. I had a really great time. It'd be hard to see this movie and not have a great time unless you just don't like comic books and these characters, which, you know, you don't have to go there. But for the people who even moderately enjoy Deadpool, you're going to have a great time. So I would go see this as quickly as you can before all the fun stuff gets spoiled. But even then, you're going to be smiling ear to ear if you are a fan of Marvel Comics, if you are a fan of so many of the characters that we've yet to see kind of come into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And for all the tongue-in-cheek, whether it's Disney, MCU comments, it was just a lot better, I would say, as a whole for a Deadpool movie. Definitely the strongest that they've been able to put together. And it's going to be really interesting to see where they go from here. Speaking of where things go from here, just, you know, before we kind of wrap things up, I've been tracking the box office for a little bit now. We know Inside Out was doing stupid numbers. Inside Out 2 has grossed almost $1.5 billion worldwide now. Billion with a B. It's just nuts. It's almost made 900 million internationally, which is crazy. And I read the other day it is now the highest grossing animated film of all time. And, you know, it's just this odd world that we live in where, again, as movies continue on, you make more in a series, more people become aware of something. Sequels end up doing stupid numbers, $1.5 billion. And the next closest movie behind it is Dune Part 2, with about half of that worldwide. $700 million it's pretty much made. And then Despicable Me 4, Kung Fu Panda 4, freaking Garfield are all in the top 10. It's nuts. But, you know, animated and kids movies usually do big numbers. But Inside Out 2, it's one that I didn't think it would be that one. Maybe I underestimated how much people really resonated with the first film. And as mental health and certain talks have gotten better over time, maybe it's built a bigger audience for that. But $1.5 billion is nuts for Inside Out 2. And, if things go the way they're going to go, Deadpool's going to make $1 billion. I don't doubt that. Already tracking for 350 million opening weekend. And they've got 2 weeks of nothing coming up. Partially probably because of the Olympics, which you can go to AMC theaters on different days, and they've got screenings to watch 4-hour chunks of Olympic events in a theater, which, was I not already recording all the Olympic events at home, I probably would go to the theater to watch something like basketball, soccer, gymnastics, whatever. I mean, that's a kind of cool thing. So just know that option is out there. If you're an Olympic nut like I am, and you're just gonna watch everything, kind of cool to know that you can do that. But the only other thing that's really kind of piquing my interest that's coming out that you should keep on your radar, and yeah, it's a Zack Snyder movie, and yeah, it's a Snyder cut. But the director's cuts of Rebel Moon are dropping, I think, August 1st. Or whatever, the second, maybe, whatever that Friday is, next Friday, on Netflix. 3.5 hours for part 1, and something like 2:45 something, almost 3 hours for part 2. These are the rated R cuts, which, if you've seen the trailer online, number one, it looks like a totally different movie because they kind of are a different movie. So much has been said online about, of course, Zack Snyder is doing a Snyder cut, and what's this bullshit about Netflix not letting him do his thing? They told him he could do whatever he wanted, and so he chose to do this. And I get it. I get the noise. If you haven't watched or listened to an interview about it, totally get it. Man goes to Netflix with a really hard R space opera project. It was pitched as a Disney, not a Disney film, but a Star Wars movie. Doesn't have anything to do with any of the Star Wars characters, but the space opera style story looking at different universes and oppression in the galaxy in different ways. Disney passed. And he's like, well, that's fine, because then they're like, this is really violent. This is a lot. There's blood and sex and all this stuff. That's not Star Wars. That shouldn't be. And it's like, yeah, you know what? That's not Star Wars. I'll keep shopping it around. Netflix is like, yeah, we're interested. We've done Army of the Dead. We've already got a good working relationship with you. We've kind of rescued you from Warner Brothers post all the Justice League Snyder Cut crap and the horrible treatment of him from Warner Brothers. And, their horrible treatment of Ben Affleck, Henry Cavill, Gal Gadot. The list goes on. Ray Fisher. But so, he kind of says, hey, I know this is going to be a big budget anyways, but what if I give you 2 PG-13 versions, 2 hours each? He talks about this at length. It's like, I understand the economics, that it's not going to be nearly as profitable to make this super hard R space opera. That's a time investment, because if you watched the first 2 Rebel Moons that are out now, it's like, all right, those were 2 hours. Those were quick and easy, but you're like, I needed more from the characters. I wanted more development. That's what this is. And so, essentially for the same budget, Netflix gets 4 movies out of this. You get your PG-13, everyone can watch those. It's fine for the family. And then he still gets to make his rated R, 300 style blood action, sci-fi epic. And, he's in interviews talked too about the fact that they recorded entirely different dialogue and sequences for those director's cuts. So it is this kind of experiment. Netflix totally trying to capitalize on the idea of the Snyder Cut, because every day it seems like this man's trending on Twitter. All press is good press. Takes a lot of arrows, but you know what? The man also has an audience, and people generally like what he does. So even if the Snyder Cut stuff is annoying, it is what it is. And for those who had gripes about Rebel Moon, I think these are going to fix a lot of that. And again, it's 6 hours just about for both parts, unrated pretty much, very adult, and which is something, again, that we in this genre don't always get to see. So I, of course, will be there opening day in my living room, unfortunately, but I will be watching Rebel Moon, the director's cuts, part 1 and 2, and I would encourage you to do so as well. If only because it's going to be a completely different experience than watching the first parts. It's like when I watched the Snyder Cut of Justice League. If you have seen the Justice League that came out in 2016, 2017, that Joss Whedon reshot most of and totally destroyed after Snyder left the project due to a family tragedy. I mean, it's night and day. It's night and day, from the color grading to the serious tone to incredible action sequences. And again, you bump story from 2 hours to 4 hours, you can tell a lot more on a grand scale. So jumping us from 4 hours to 6 hours or so for these combined stories should fill in a lot that I think people are looking for. And I think the bones are already there for a pretty solid movie. So I'd give it a whirl. It's on Netflix. If you have Netflix like everyone else in the world, what else are you doing next Friday? Give it a go. But that pretty much does it for this week. Like I was saying, the Olympics are right around the corner. So I'm glad that I got Deadpool out of the way, because I have a feeling that this weekend is just going to be lots of mindless, anything from field hockey to gymnastics to table tennis. They're doing breakdancing. It's also a good time to catch up on movies too. Bad Boys for Life. No, not for life. It should have been Bad Boys for Life. Bad Boys Ride or Die, which they've said themselves they should have saved Bad Boys for Life for number 4. But, someone's not being paid enough to come up with their clever titles. But that's on VOD now. I was a fan more so of this 4th Bad Boys film than the 3rd. Will Smith and Martin Lawrence, they keep doing it. They are an unstoppable comedy action duo that, I don't know, I feel like we're probably going to see more of, and I'm not mad. So there's plenty for you to go check out. Oddity, I would almost go see that first, just in that sense of limited engagement. You don't want to miss it when it's out of the theater, because that experience is just always better. You're probably already going to see Deadpool. You've got plenty of time to see it, but just stay away from those spoilers as best you can. And if you haven't seen Inside Out, I don't think it needs any more of your money, but, it doesn't hurt if you go see a great family film too, because Inside Out 2 is pretty darn good. Not quite as good as the original, but I would still say pretty great. Thank you again, as always, for tuning in. You can find us at NT Movie Reviews on all social media networks, podcast platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube Music Now, and you can find us in video on YouTube as well. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.